since the last material on Anselm. Quick reminder, your study guide for your final, which is just another test. Test 3. It's just another test. Not cumulative. It's 100 points. I'm saying it's just another test. But it is everything from Anselm. The study guide, which I've printed out, and you should have as well, or at least have it with you in some fashion. You should be looking at the questions. In fact, you should have been looking at question number 4, describe the problem of evil fully. That's what we're going to cover today after I wrap up a few more things about the cosmological argument. In fact, I'll do that now. Any questions on where we are in the class? You've got like 5 more quizzes and 1 more test. That's about 150 points. So if you're not happy with your grade now, you have a lot of points to make up. All right? And for those who bring food into the class, if you do so, whatever, fine. But clean it up. Don't leave it in the room. Okay? Let's wrap up where we were last time. The cosmos is everything. The cosmological argument is the argument that says, basically, or rather it tries to explain why there is something rather than nothing. What explains, what justifies, what is a causal factor with respect to the existence of anything? We left off last time talking about the parts of the cosmos. So you exist. You exist as a contingent thing. This marker's not very good. This says contingent. You are a contingent thing. Do you remember what contingent means? You depend on something other than yourself. Another fancy phrase for contingent is ontological independence. You didn't exist some 20, 30 years ago, whatever the case may be. Your parents had to bring you into existence. Your existence is dependent upon them. And their existence is dependent upon their parents, and so on. Infinitely back? What's wrong with that? What's that called? An infinite regress. This is absurd. Why is it absurd? Because it's similar to saying we've got a railway car here that's being pulled by this railway car, which is being pulled by this railway car, and there's an infinite chain of railway cars, each one connected to the other, but there's no engine. There's an infinite string of railway cars, and they're all moving. One thing's moving the other, but there's no explanation for the entirety. The cosmological argument, Aquinas' 5 ways, that's 10, I meant just 5. The Aquinas' 5 ways is trying to get at an explanation for the entirety of the universe. Did I mention the Bertrand Russell, Frederick Copleston debate last time? Did I talk to you about that? Yeah. Online? Do you remember that? Anyone look that up? No. The 2 guys that sound exactly the same? That's right. Anyone listen to that? Nobody can confirm that my mockery of them was accurate? Oh, that's upsetting. Anyway, if you get a chance, go listen to that. BBC broadcast from 1948. Frederick Copleston versus Bertrand Russell. Copleston argues that since we need an explanation for the parts, and that's you. You are part of the cosmos, and you are a contingent thing. There was a time in which you didn't exist. You are an effect that has to have cause, an explanation. That's the principle of sufficient what? Principle of sufficient reason. For everything that exists, there's an explanation or a cause of it. You are a contingent thing. This planet and everything in it is contingent. And how many take astronomy? Anyone in astronomy right now? How old is the Earth? About 4.6 billion years old. That tells you it's really damn old, but it's not always been. There was a time in which the Earth wasn't. That means there was a time in which everything on the Earth, except for maybe asteroids or comets or what are they called? Meteorites? The things that make it to Earth called? Yeah, meteorites. Those may be older. But everything else on Earth is less than 5 billion years old, which tells you that there was a time in which none of this existed. The solar system, the sun, is what, 10 billion years old? I don't know. But it hasn't always been. There was a time in which the solar system didn't exist. There was a time in which the galaxy didn't exist, the Milky Way. There was a time in which the entirety of the universe did not exist. If everything that exists is contingent. This is Aquinas' third way. Remember, the first way is motion. We see things moving, they're caused by, that motion must be caused by something prior to it. Moving one thing from potential to actual motion requires something other than the thing itself. We see things that exist. They are effects. Something had to bring them into existence. And they could not be self-caused. Bless you. Or shall I say, may the first cause uncaused, prime mover, necessary, ontologically independent being, bless you. Is that too long? Anyway, salute. Damn it, threw myself off.
Motion?
No. Huh?
Efficient
Okay, so I think that's it. Efficient causation. We see these things exist. Something brought them into existence prior to that. We see also that there was a time in which these things did not exist. If that's true of everything in the universe, including the universe itself, that there was a time in which it was not, and according to astronomers like Stephen Hawking, dealt with that last time, when did the universe begin, roughly? Do you know?
About 14 billion years ago.
About 14 billion years ago, give or take, I don't know, a few million. 14 billion. Isn't that weird that you can say that? You can be off by a few million, like, that's not bad. That's pretty good. It's like, who's the richest guy in the world now? Bezos guy? He's worth like, what, 130 million? No, excuse me, $130 billion or so. He might not even know. How much are you worth? I don't know. 130 billion. Give or take 5 billion. You can be off by 5 billion. Like, whatever. Who cares? If I'm off by $10, I'm like, okay, I get pissed off. I have more than that. I have more than whatever that says. Again, I've thrown myself off. I apologize. So, first two ways, motion and causation. And the third way, possibility and necessity. This is the crux of the argument. If all that exists are merely contingent things, which tells us it's contingent means it's ontologically dependent on something other than itself, that tells us there was a time in which these things were not, as is the case with you, and this planet, and this solar system, and this galaxy. And if it's true of the universe as a whole, that means there was a time in which there was nothing. What's another presupposition of Aquinas' argument? Can you get something from nothing? No. If you cannot get something from nothing, and there was a time in which there was total nothingness, then there would always and still be nothing. But, what? There's something. Therefore, logically, there must have always been something. Which is to say, there has to have been a necessary being which halts the regress. That necessary being is the greatest being, in some sense. That fourth way of Aquinas, the way of gradation. The gradation found in things, the gradation of being, the gradation of goodness, and so on. If there's a better than, there must be a best, a highest. Right? And so, the debate is, our presumption of principle of sufficient reason says everything that exists has an explanation. There are no just brute, unexplained facts. So therefore, we need an explanation of the entire series. As Frederick Copleston in the debate says, it's a Valentian composition, but whatever. If you don't explain the entirety, you've left out something. Honestly, that's exactly what they both sound like, what I just did there. Right on, spot on. So, I haven't explained the whole series if I've only given you approximate explanation, or a proximal cause. A is the cause of B, B is the cause of C. But if I don't have an explanation for the entirety, then something's missing. To which Bertrand Russell says, nonsense. But he says it nicely. To say that we need an explanation of the entire series because we need an explanation of the parts is analogous to saying, and I may have given this to you last time, every member of this class, every individual of this class has a mother. That's true. Does it follow that the class as a whole has a mother? The answer is no. Right? Right? You say probably? Definitely not. There's no mother that gave birth to this class. That's how weird. There's a category mistake too. Right? And Russell goes further and invokes a myth. This is the turtles that you were dreaming about, perhaps. You had a dream of a herd of turtles?
In this class, I don't know.
Is it a herd of turtles, or is it just a group, a pod? Probably a pod. Or a murder. You heard it's a murder of crows. Did you know that's what it's called? Why? I have no idea. Doesn't matter. Russell says, this sounds like what you're doing, Copleston. This sounds like what you're doing, St. Thomas Aquinas, with your cosmological argument that looks for a first cause of everything, that's outside of the causal series of time and space. And he invokes the Native American or Indian myth, I can't remember what he rephrases it as, where they ask, what holds up the earth? What keeps the earth from plummeting down to the depths of nothingness? We'll borrow from that and discuss the cosmos instead, and say, what holds up the cosmos? What's the cause of the cosmos? And according to the myth, it's held up by a great turtle. It's a smiley one. I'm not really awesome at, that's not bad. Well, we'll just write turtle. So turtle holds up the universe, the cosmos. Are we done with our explanation? Are you satisfied with what holds up the universe? Who said yeah? You done? Why is the universe here? Because of the turtle. Sounds good to me. Clearly you want to ask more. What do you ask? What holds up the turtle? And according to the myth, another turtle. This one's less happy. It's holding up the other one. It's brown. So, another turtle. Which holds up the first turtle, which holds up the universe. Done. Principle of sufficient reason is maintained. We have a justification, we have an explanation, we have a causal series of events that holds up the universe. Questions on that?
Who holds up the first turtle?
Yeah.
It's turtles all the way down, Russell says. They get more and more sad because they're holding up so much stuff. Turtles all the way down to what? Just spit, no one's sitting there, that's all right. Turtles all the way down to a great elephant in this case. Surprisingly similar to the turtle. It's got a thing, there's an ear, and we'll write E for elephant. That's an elephant, a trunk, and pretty sure that's what they look like. Elephant holds up the column of turtles that holds up the universe. Done. Unless you want to ask, what holds up the elephant that holds up the turtles? This is a surprising one. I've added to this. This is not Bertrand Russell's example. The answer is Chuck Norris is holding up, he's got a beard. He's only using one hand. He's only using one hand. That's all he needs. He's holding up the elephant that holds up the turtles that holds up the universe. Dare anyone ask what holds up Chuck Norris? You want to ask that?
Chuck Norris holds himself.
Boom, that's it. That's the answer. Nothing holds up Chuck Norris because Chuck Norris is what? Is Chuck Norris contingent? No, well,
Question, Chuck
yeah.
Norris.
I wasn't going to go to God that quickly, but yes. Chuck Norris is ontologically independent in this analogy. Chuck Norris is a necessary being that halts the regress. In this case, the regress is going downward as opposed to backward. Bertrand Russell is saying, Occam's razor tells us to cut away the extraneous, to cut away that which multiplies entities beyond necessity that, in fact, cause more confusion than they do clarity. Where are these turtles coming from? How come I don't see them? So I get rid of them with Occam's razor. I cut them away, cut the elephant, very gently cut away. Chuck Norris, he knows how to fight, and then I fight, even in Occam's razor. He knows how to roundhouse kick or whatever you do. Get rid of all of that, Russell says, and say, you know what? If the third way of Aquinas goes through and it's convincing that in order to halt a regress, which is an absurdity, we can't have infinite regresses, there has to be a necessary being or a necessary cause or a necessary thing, why not, since you're already committed to the logical possibility of a being having always been, namely God, you're already committed to the logical possibility of there being an ontologically independent thing, a necessary thing. Why not cut away all of that and say it's just the universe? The universe has always been. The universe is necessary. Invoking God doesn't help explain the universe, it just increases now the things that need further explanation. One response is to say, no, it doesn't. God doesn't require an explanation. God is not self-caused, but has always been, is a necessary being, does not require further description or explanation for its existence. If we're already committed to that way of thinking, why not employ Occam's razor again and leave us with only the universe itself? Even though the universe we claim has a beginning 14 point something billion years ago, we could invoke, and also doesn't quite go into this, something that we find in Indian philosophy, Hindu philosophy for millennia, something called the accordion theory of the universe. The idea is that 14 point something billion years ago, there was a great singularity, an explosion that gives rise to everything that is. Space, time, matter, and also now we call it something called antimatter. Energy and dark energy, dark matter. What the hell is that? It's kind of something that scientists have invoked to help explain why the universe hasn't expanded off infinitely in every direction in such a way that gravitational forces no longer have any pull. Apparently the universe is still held together. There's enough matter, there's enough material to provide gravitational connectivity. If that's the case, perhaps, and there's debates about this, it's less likely, I think, today, according to cosmologists, that there's enough matter in the universe that the universe will eventually contract because gravitational forces will pull everything together and create another Big Bang. The Big Bang will happen, gravitational forces pull everything back together again, you see, and then a big, what's it called? Big crunch. Big Bang, big crunch. What's the beginning of this? This is called the accordion theory. See what I'm doing? Playing accordion. There's no God playing the accordion. It's just the universe contracting, expanding with no beginning. Why is that any more logically abhorrent than invoking a God that has always been? That's Russell's main point. To which, I actually, before I go on further with that, I saw a hand like a half hour ago.
So basically what Russell's saying is that we just need an independent being, and we don't have to, God doesn't have to be this independent being because the universe can be that independent being, right?
The universe could be ontologically independent. That is to say, it doesn't require a cause of it any more than God would. But we know the universe exists. We do not know that God exists.
So we don't really need the idea. I mean, what he's trying to prove, I guess, is just like God is just an idea. You're trying to explain what the universe can do by itself without a God.
Exactly right. And Russell was once asked, what would you say to God if indeed after you die there is a God? What would you say to him? And how would you explain to God why it is you didn't believe in God? And Russell's response was, not enough evidence. I mean, I don't know if he said it exactly like that, but basically that, not enough evidence. There's not enough evidence to compel him, according to Russell. However, we might respond still with Aquinas and his fifth way. What's Aquinas' fifth way? You've got design. You've got motion, efficient causation, possibility, contingency, and necessity. The gradation found in things, the gradation of being, and design. The most commonly used, employed argument in contemporary philosophy, but also in layman's terms, it seems the most accessible argument. The universe appears to have design, function, purpose. In fact, another term for it, you know what, I'm not going to erase that. That took too much work. Oh, that's going to have to do. That didn't work. Teleological. The teleological argument, also known as the argument by design, comes from the Greek root telos. Teleological. Telos meaning ends, or purpose, function, or goal. Computers are clearly made with a function, a purpose, with complexity, with design. And who's going to say there's no designer of a computer? That would be absurd. The argument goes this way. By analogy, which makes it inductive, therefore conclusion follows merely with probability, because all arguments by analogy are inductive arguments. By analogy, the universe and us in it are beautiful, alive, complex, and seemingly with purpose, seemingly designed. The solar system itself is an example of this. Why is the sun where it is? If it were a little bit further away, no life. A little bit closer, no life, no human consciousness. If the moon were a little bit further away or too close, no consciousness. If the elements of the air were different by a tiny bit, a little bit more nitrogen, a little less oxygen, or vice versa. If the strong or electronic or electrical magnetic forces, like the nuclear forces, if they were off by a little bit, as Stephen Hawking himself, an atheist, puts it, if the universe's expansion seconds after the Big Bang was faster than it was, even by a little bit, the universe would have expanded into a great fireball and there would be no stars to give rise to you, because you're stardust, ultimately. You are the stuff of stars, suns. If the universe had expanded even a little bit slower, again, there's not enough thrust to give rise to all of the things that are. This is something called it's a variation of the fine-tuning argument, which is to say, it appears, given the complexity, the design, the fragility, and the improbability of life and consciousness in this vast universe, it seems there's a divine I was going to say divine tweaker. That's not quite right. That's not what I intend. Tweaking the knobs, manipulating the knobs just right to get it for life to exist. As Rauhut quotes Fred Hoyle in the text, to assume that life and consciousness could arrive on our planet by chance, by forces of mere nature and evolution, without intentional design by an intelligence or a consciousness. This is Aquinas' fifth way. It's just not as fully developed as he presented. It's just more fully developed than he presented it. Would be analogous to saying a tornado strikes a junkyard, and as a result, a working 747 jumbo airplane pops out. How likely is that?
Not very likely.
Not very likely.
According to Ben Carson, not very likely.
According to Ben Carson.
That was he made a stupid argument.
He made the argument about what?
That's why God exists.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Okay. Ben Carson, a neurosurgeon, he understands the complexity of a human brain. What are the chances of a human brain giving rise to consciousness without a divine tweaker? In a meth lab. I'm kidding. That's not. You had a question.
What if kind of an arrogant way to look at it as that life as we know it may be difficult to come about, but there could be more to, I know it's bringing in an idea of aliens, I guess, but there could be life that could be functionally different than we are.
Yeah.
And so that we happen to be the way we are, yeah, okay, but what if there's other life that's developed in a different way, or another type
And we are discovering that in our own oceans. How do those things live down there?
Exactly.
They're very different.
I mean, you look at something like extremophiles, and you would think that they're sitting there literally in volcanoes under the sea, and yet they survive and thrive there.
Yeah.
It's the idea that
That's an interesting
if
term
we're
for
thinking
it.
about it, tweaking it, that we're looking at it from a human perspective. From the universe perspective, we're not really tweaking anything. That just happens to be that way. It's very plausible at that point that it could just happen that way.
This is one of the reasons why Carl Sagan was so interested in pushing SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. This wasn't a kind of, UFO sighting type of.
Arrogant to think that we're the only life that could possibly conform in this exact form, and all life has to be this way.
Very good.
And
Now,
so-
go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, you go.
Oh, okay. And so just from that perspective, you're looking at it from a very humanistic perspective when you say, oh, someone has to be tweaking it so that we are perfectly in this Goldilocks zone.
That's right. That's what it's called.
And
Yeah.
from a actual point of view outside of humanistic, it would be wrong to say that. Or not wrong.
Of course, how do we adopt the perspective of an extremophile?
We can't.
Whatever that is. Yeah. Well, here's what Sagan tries to do, related to your point, is to get us to consider just how big our galaxy is. Remember how big our galaxy is? How big is the Milky Way? 90,000 light years across. Takes like 90,000 light years, 90,000 years to go from one side to the other. That's just our galaxy, and I'm told there may be trillions. Is that right, astronomers? You raised your hand earlier about taking astronomy class, so you.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to you on every question about it.
I'm not a good person to ask about astronomy.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go with trillions then until somebody refutes me. Trillions, not just trillions of planets, trillions of galaxies. And in each galaxy, there could be billions of possible planets the size of Earth, roughly, and the same distance to its sun, which gives rise to an increasing probability that there might be life somewhat similar to ours. If the laws of physics hold in all these places, then life would probably be, to an extent, similar to what you find on planets. Similar, but we don't know for sure.
But at that other level as well, similar doesn't even. You have to, again, thinking that it's similar, even that life could be, through the laws of physics, different. You can have mechanisms within a life form that are different than what a human's
Right.
would be. So it's even thinking similar could be.
I see. And you know what's interesting? This argument is sometimes known as, it's based on the anthropic principle, that there's a designer. Why? Well, because life seems so perfect for us. Anthropology is the study of man, humans, but not extremophiles, not aliens. It's the study of the anthropic principle is saying the universe is probably designed because it seems too coincidental that there's human life. And you're saying, well, wait a minute, that seems very anthropocentric. And indeed, that's one of the critiques. And beyond that, even if we are to accept the design argument, let's imagine that we're convinced by the design argument. What does the design, the universe, or just the Earth, let's just narrow it down now, because we don't know enough about these other galaxies, what does the effect of that we can see the Earth as an effect, as something created by a designer? What does it tell us about the designer? You can look at this computer, you can look at a car, and you can say, the person who made that is probably pretty impressive. But what else can you tell? Can you tell that the person who made this computer is a good or bad person? Male or female? More than one person made it? The design argument doesn't really tell us what kind of designer we're dealing with. And this takes us to the problem you have for today. The reading you had for today, which I referenced last time, was a little graphic, did I not? I warned you. And my discussion today is also going to be graphic. It's going to be somewhat uncomfortable. And I think that's somewhat necessary. Because you look around, you walk outside and you see absolute beauty. I don't think there's any other campuses, and I mean this, I've been on a lot of campuses. There are very few campuses in the world, possibly the universe, literally, that are more beautiful than this one. This is probably one of the most beautiful campuses in the frickin' universe. And if there's multiple universes, the multiverse, a possible response to there being a first cause and an only cause of this universe, that's incredible. And so things seem pretty good to us. But if you look just a little bit, actually, just a month or two ago, if you lived around the area, things weren't great. We lived in Montecito. And a month before that with the fires. So even here, in this amazing place, there are problems. Yes?
Oh, isn't beauty relative, though?
No, it's mathematical. I don't know. We used to say in college, beauty is in the eye of the beer holder. Yeah. We were very clever back then, because we drank a lot of beer. I didn't like beer at first, but I practiced. Remember I told you that? I had to really, really struggle and work. And now I love beer. All right, so yes, it is, but maybe it's subjective. But the idea that there is a designer of, say, you look at Stonehenge. You don't say, wow, how weird that those rocks just fell there. You say, wow, what was the purpose of this? I don't know what the design was or purpose was, but somebody had some intention. You look at Mount Rushmore. I mean, imagine I tell my kid, look, Milo and Lola, that's what wind and water erosion does. Isn't that crazy? That would be terrible to tell a child that, because that's not what wind and water erosion does. The better explanation of that is that there was a designer, that there was somebody who carved it. By analogy, the design argument's doing the same thing, but with the universe as a whole. Let's, for the sake of argument, assume that we're convinced by it, that there probably is a designer. What does that argument tell us about the designer? it takes us to this, the problem of evil. Or how good is the design? And how does that reflect on the designer? Why do bad things happen to good people? Or why do good things happen to bad people? The first episode of The Simpsons I ever saw was one in which Lisa Simpson, who was 8 years old, lost a tooth and put it in a petri dish, which is what all 8-year-old girls do, and left it outside on her bedside table or something like that. And over time, out of this tooth grew a civilization. And immediately you see the connection to a biblical story there. Out of this tooth arose a civilization, analogous to what? Where did Eve come from? Adam's rib, right? This is an interesting parallel here, except it's turned around. It's now a little girl from which the universe spawns. And this civilization grows exponentially with technology, and they develop a debigulator, I think it was called, and they shrink Lisa down, and they ask her questions. You know, some of the questions are silly, like, Lisa, where's my sandwich? I lost a sandwich. And they want to know where their sandwich is. But one of the questions is, which you might ask if you think Lisa is what? God, because they were created by her. Why do bad things happen to good people? That's a tough question. That showed me that show was not for children. This was a difficult. It was humorous, of course, how they did it. And Bart Simpson, by the way, was the devil because he was trying to kill them with his magnifying glass using the sunlight, obviously. But why is it the case that good things happen to bad people? Why is it the case that some Nazis got away? They did. How is that possible? How can the world be just if Nazis got away after causing the Holocaust? Why did that have to happen? That's. I think I just broke it. Why, God? Never mind. I don't know if anyone answered that. It automatically goes to security. Go ahead.
Oh, so what you're saying is it could possibly be a flawed designer?
Or
Or a
designers.
designer that just can't do anything about what they design?
Well, yes, I'm kind of joking about the platypus, but not really. What the hell is that? Is it a duck? Could be. Is it a beaver? A cow? It lactates. It has eggs. It spits poison. It can swim. It can walk on land. So it's somewhat incredible. But also, it's like the designer made everything and had extra stuff lying around and said, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to make that. And one argument is to say, that's an intentional design of the creator. Yes?
I just have a side note about platypus. I'm just curious.
Platypi?
Do platypi, do they often have poor concepts of time?
I don't think that question has ever been asked in the history of the universe. Do platypi have poor concepts of time? I'm going to say, yeah, because they can't, watches won't fit on their hooves or whatever that is. So yes, they do. That's does that satisfy the?
Yeah.
I sense there's a reason you had that question. I'm sorry.
Oh, I have a joke about platypi with my dad.
Okay.
I did when I was younger. So I was just curious to see if what he was talking about was actually true.
I do not know. All I know about the platypus is those few things I listed. They could have a great sense of time because they're, I don't know, they're so versatile. They can go on land and water, and I honestly don't know the answer to that. I'm going to change my answer and say yes, they have an excellent sense of time. But that's really, that's kind of trivial. Those who are in biology classes, let's put you on the hook now. How many take biology? All right, what do your biologists tell you? Let's see, maybe this isn't biology, maybe it's zoology. What do you know about the vast majority of species that have ever existed on this planet? All the species, what is a common fate?
They all have this common ancestor and they evolve over time.
That's part of it, that's true. But related to the problem of evil, what do you think I'm going toward?
They all die at some point.
They all have gone extinct. Not just died, but the whole species. And I don't know what the number is, 98%? 98, could be more, 98% of all species that have ever existed on this planet, the platypus is going to survive, don't worry about the platypus. It can go anywhere. But 98% have gone extinct. That's a terrible track record. If the goal is life, this is a horrible design. Imagine getting a score on your test. What'd you get on the test? 2. You got 2? You mean you missed 2? No, I got a 2 out of 100. That's terrible. And this is a God? That's a problem. The platypus is not that big of a problem. No, this isn't really the problem of evil. That's going to give you a visual of it. But to be a bit more serious, the biological question is one. Why is it that so many species have gone extinct? Why is it that so often our children, and this is going to take us to Dostoevsky's reading for today, why is it that children not only die but suffer and then horribly, it seemingly gratuitously suffer and die? That's the story that Dostoevsky is concerned with. Nicholas Wolterstorff, who, like Dostoevsky had a tough life, lost a lot of his friends, family. He suffered from, Dostoevsky did, epileptic seizures, which to him actually gave him what he would call mystical or religious experiences, which is interesting. But it's fascinating that people like Nicholas Wolterstorff, a religious person, a believer in God, and Dostoevsky, a believer in God, are oftentimes more acutely aware of the problem of evil, the problem of suffering, than perhaps those who are non-theists or something like that. And Wolterstorff says the following with respect to the death of his young son. He says, and think about this too in terms of our discussion of personal identity. This may be an interesting take on personal identity as well. He says, a center like no other, of memory and hope and knowledge and affection, which once inhabited the earth is gone. Only a gap remains. A perspective on this world, unique in this world, which once moved about within this world has been rubbed out. Only a void is left. There's nobody now who saw just what he saw, knows what he knew, remembers what he remembered, loves what he loved. A person, an irreplaceable person, is gone. Never again will anyone apprehend the world quite the way that he did. Having to deal with that, having to outlive your child, that is the problem of evil. The problem of evil is not, you go to a gym and you see that slogan on the wall. Every gym has it. No pain, no gain. That is not the problem of evil. You stub your toe. That's not the problem of evil. Having to sit through a philosophy class when it's so nice out, you could be at the beach, which is right there. That sucks, but it's not the problem of evil. The problem of evil is this. The problem of evil is represented with Epicurus. This is not a new problem, you can see. Epicurus frames the debate very, very early, as he puts it this way, very famously. This is requoted by multiple philosophers. Is he willing to prevent evil but not able? Well, then he's impotent. Which means what? Impotent. Not powerful. That's right, lacking in power. Is he able but not willing? Well, then he's malevolent. He's able to stop the suffering, but doesn't. He's evil. Is he both able and willing? Then what is the cause? How is it that we have evil? And we can look at a variation of that in the terms, and Rauch gives an example of this, and I'm going to just give you the standard logical form of it, so you'll have this as well. Going back to Aquinas and Anselm and the understanding of God as the greatest conceivable being, premise 1 tells us that God is omnipotent, that's all powerful. Premise 2, God is omniscient, that's all knowing. 3, God is all good, omnibenevolent. But now we throw 4 in. And if you don't like the word evil, premise 4 says evil exists. Maybe evil has too much theological baggage or something for you. Then throw in, instead, horrendous suffering. Or maybe even we beg the question by calling it gratuitous. You know what gratuitous means?
Like over the top?
Kind of, over the top. Extra, unnecessary. Unnecessary suffering. Gratuitous, horrendous suffering. That seems to exist. We'll have to talk more about what that means. And by the way, when I waited tables, I hated it when they called it gratuity, because it sounds like it's extra. No, that's what you live on. It's not over the top. It's not extra. It's my salary, you son of a... Okay, so that upset me. Still to this day it does. Here we have the argument continue. If premise 4 is true, and who's going to discount that evil exists? Some actually try to, but that's tough work. 5 says, if God is omnipotent, is all-powerful, then he would be able to stop, prevent the evil and suffering in the world. Or else, we might say, God's not all-powerful. But remember our discussion of intrinsic maximums. Remember our discussion of Anselm's definition of God and his presumption that we all would have the same conception, even atheists. But that's not obvious, because here we see, and we anticipated this, the problem of evil raises issues about the concept of God and the concept of omnipotence. Do we all have the same sense of what that means? Would an omnipotent God step in and stop horrible suffering? It seems that he would want to, if he knew about it. But guess what? If God is all-knowing, omniscient, then presumably God also would know that there's horrendous suffering about to happen or currently happening, and would know how to stop it. And of course, the last one, if God is all good, God would want to stop that suffering. The conclusion, God must not be all of the omnis. Which is another way of just saying, God does not exist. Because the definition of God is a perfect being. Morally, knowledge-wise, power-wise, perfect. There are interesting moves you can make here, and some after the Holocaust did. Reformed Jews, in fact, came out of the Holocaust and said, we still believe in God, Reformed Judaism, but we do not think God is all-powerful. God is all-knowing, and God is all-good, but God suffered with us during the Holocaust. And by the way, many Jews do not like the term Holocaust. That term actually means burnt offering. You see it in ancient Hebrew, you see it in the early scriptures. A Holocaust is a burnt offering, a kind of sacrifice. Well, the Jews don't look at the Holocaust, what happened in 1939 to 1945, as a sacrifice. They call it, in fact, the Shoah, which means desolation, which is a better concept than just sacrifice. In any case, many, after that experience, thought that God could not possibly exist if such things were allowed to happen. And others, as I said, with Reformed Judaism, basically changed what the definition of God is. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just saying, it's like one of the theist counter-arguments to premise 7 is that some evil makes good more good. It's kind of like if you just get something for Christmas versus working, even though working sucks, it makes what you buy more valuable to you.
Yes, the Les Claypool philosophy on... Anyone know Les Claypool of Primus? Yeah, all right. You're the one that knows the Rush too, right?
Yeah.
All right. It's the dude, so I'm going to keep making these references. All it takes is one person, and I'll just keep doing it. So Les Claypool, what does he say? Funny thing about being unemployed, the weekends don't mean quite so much. You see? Funny thing about being unemployed is the weekend, who cares? It's Monday morning. What are you going to do? I guess we'll drink. I don't know. What's the difference? Monday just bleeds together and all the other days. But if you got to work, then you look forward to Friday and say, yeah, now we can go to the library and enjoy ourselves. Didn't expect that, did you? And drink at the library. So maybe that's the explanation. But that's a tough one. Why do we have suffering? Why does God allow evil? So that we enjoy the good things more? Why is it that you enjoyed the birth of your child so much? Well, because and this is a caricature in response, but imagine this. I was so happy the day my child was born because I was at the same time thinking about the Holocaust. What? Well, the Holocaust was horrible. And that allows me to make my child being born greater. Must we have holocausts to have joy be as joyful as it can be? Can we not imagine a world in which there are no holocausts, but there are still joys? Do you see? And we might add, is it a God worthy of worship that creates the universe such that it's necessary for there to be horrible, horrible suffering? Just so that others, and notice this too, it's other people who are suffering. And my thought of, well, at least I'm not them, makes me feel better. That's not very good. I mean, those people are still suffering. So it might be making your life more palatable, but the problem of their suffering doesn't go away. I guess that would be, I don't know if that clarifies that response. But let's actually tag on to that. Before I get to Dostoevsky, Premise 4 was evil exists. I have to first clarify there are two kinds of evil that are typically discussed in the philosophy of religion. There's natural evils. And natural evils are like hurricanes. This struck Puerto Rico. By the way, Puerto Rico has not improved much. And this hurricane happened a long time ago. They only recently got electricity. That's perhaps a moral failing, a different kind of evil, as we'll see. But this kind of devastation seems to happen by nature. That's a natural evil. It's a different kind, according to most philosophers. And here's an natural evil as well. This is my cat, Chloe. Cute? Yes?
Yep.
Yeah. Not so cute when she gets a hold of a little mole. Do you know what a mole is? You heard of a mole? Have you ever heard a mole scream?
Oh.
I have. They're really small, but they can make noises. And it's not like a little chew toy. It squeaks a little. It screams. It's as if there's a small person screaming. What is that noise? We went out there and Chloe's batting something around. Oh, it's that living thing that looks like it's feeling horrible, horrible pain. And so I'll try to save it. And I do that with birds too. I don't do this anymore. She doesn't hunt anymore. She's very old. She's just like, whatever. But I'll take the bird out of her mouth and say, don't. Even though you've been bred to do this for generations or whatever by humans. And I'll try to save the bird by putting it up on a branch, surely to die by some other animal. This is part of the point. Surely to die by some other animal. Have you ever watched, and I'm being purposely aggressive here, to push this line. The problem of evil is not a simple, we typically don't have to think about it. And we're lucky not to have to think much about it. But the problem of evil is, and Dostoevsky talks about this with animals, but watch a squirrel. Just watch it for a while. It's paranoid all the time because there are threats from below with snakes, dogs, cats, from the air with hawks. I once saw a hawk, which was the size of Chloe, but with wings, fly down and grab a squirrel, crush it with its claws, and then just start eating it. And I couldn't look away. It was awful. The squirrel was not happy about it. And yet this is the fate of so many creatures. How do they survive? Some survive by eating the living flesh of other creatures that presumably can feel pain. That is a strange design. If I'm an all-powerful being, an all-knowing being, and that's how I design the universe, that's weird, isn't it?
So how would you respond to the argument that it's not, what is it? It's not the guns that are killing people, it's the people killing people.
I would go with Chris Rock and say, bullets! Bullets kill people.
So would you be able
Well,
to,
there you're back to the distinction between causes and reasons.
yeah.
Bullets are the cause of the death, certainly. But that's a proximate cause. The trigger pulling and shooting the bullet out is another causal factor. My finger pulling the trigger is a causal factor. And the muscles, all causal. And then I get somewhere in my brain, to my mind, maybe through the pineal gland, if I'm Descartes, and I have a reason for pulling the trigger at that person. There you get into reasons that are different than mere causes. And so in that sense, the gun and the bullet caused the person to die, but the reason the person died was because that person shot them and wanted them dead. If it was an accident, then I don't know that there is a reason. And here Bertrand Russell comes in and says, against the cosmological argument that is dependent upon the principle of sufficient reason, and says, wait a minute, maybe there just are brute facts. Maybe the principle of sufficient reason fails in some cases. Yeah, there's a cause for everything, but I don't want to look for a reason for an earthquake that killed 250,000 people in 2005. I don't want to look for a reason for that happening, because that implies someone or something had the intention of doing it or allowing it to happen. It seems more palatable to say there was a cause of that tsunami, but it didn't happen for any reason. But if we invoke God, then reasons are back in, and we have the problem of evil. Did you have a question, Kevin?
I was gonna say for the gun thing, like, could you just go back and be like, a person invented the gun, so people did it? I mean, there's a reason.
Maybe, but guns are also perhaps, yeah, that's interesting. That's too hard to answer.
People made it for a reason, so essentially
Yeah.
people made it to kill. I mean,
Yeah,
I
or
doubt you would create that to not kill someone.
you could use it to hunt. But there again, what are you
Kill
hunting? You don't have to hunt
something.
vegetables. Although the harvest to the carrots is the Holocaust. There's a Tool reference. That's, oh my God. I'm sorry. Never mind. That was not appropriate. Given the image, it's right there. This is an example of moral evil. Natural evils are things that happen like hurricanes, tsunamis, disease, and so forth. Moral evils are the things that human beings do to other human beings. Moral evils, and every day I can come up with new examples. This, in fact, is dated. This is 2015. I can go back to last week with the same damn regime, Assad's regime in Syria. There's significant evidence that they are responsible for gassing, using chemical weapons. And one of the reasons why these kinds of weapons are frowned upon is because they're indiscriminate. They float in the air. It's not like we can pinpoint who we're trying to get, and so children suffer. And it's a horrible, horrible death. That's a moral evil. That's the sort of things that Dostoevsky talks about. The ladies of the Real Housewives, also moral evil, as anyone who's seen the show knows what I'm talking about. And then there's this, which is perhaps both moral and natural evil. Starvation. How is it that in 2018, anyone, anywhere in the world is starving? It's not because there's a limitation of food or too little food. That's not the only reason. A lot of it has to do with a failure of other human beings getting those resources there. If the United States alone didn't waste as much food as we waste, and if you don't think we waste food, just go to any restaurant and look outside on a Sunday evening where they just throw away. Go to a kids' buffet. Holy shit, that's a sign of evil. Kids' buffet? What are you thinking having that? Kids will get everything on their plate and eat nothing of it. And then what do? It has to be thrown away. That's a moral evil, it seems to me. Whereas you see a combination of the two with drought, natural disasters, and human failure combined give us both moral and natural evils.
Well, I feel like this kind of goes along with what you said, which I think is interesting of there are ways that we could help moral evil that's going on. We could help others. And I feel like humans are so, there's this discomfort in it. It's like we're almost uncomfortable with helping others. This is an example, in my German school, on campus, a part of it was our gym was no longer the gym. It was where a lot of Syrian refugees were living. Because I was there in 2015. That was the heightened time of it. And no one wanted to go talk to them. Everyone felt sorry for them, but no one wanted to deal with it.
Yeah.
In a sense. I feel like humans are uncomfortable with confronting evil.
I don't know. That's a tough question. I don't know if appealing to Louis C.K. here makes the most sense, but he has an example of this with poverty in New York City, where he had a friend come from the Midwest and not used to seeing homelessness everywhere, and a homeless person just lying in magazines, in newspapers by themselves, cold and shivering. And this woman comes off the train or whatever with Louis C.K. walking down the street and says, "Oh my God, are you okay?" and runs to help the person. And Louis C.K. is like, No, just don't bother him. He's fine. Well, he's not fine. He really needs our help, but you just don't do that, right? And so there's it's an interesting sort of divide. In certain places, we just see the evil and we ignore it because it is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable to see that, especially when it will make you feel guilty, especially if you're going to a high-end shopping place and then there's somebody who has nothing right outside that door. Now, it could be the case that they're trying to swindle you and they actually really have a lot of money and they're just trying to do this as an easy way of getting money. That's possible, but is it a good idea to assume that that's the case rather than that the person actually doesn't have much? Those are tough questions. Those are tough questions indeed. All right, let's get on to the article then, the reading, in which Dostoevsky, who in preparing for this article, this book, it's from the brothers Karamazov. The reading you had was called The Rebellion. And in it you've got Aloysia and Ivan. These are two brothers. And there's a whole lot of background. The story, it's a Russian novel, so it's 1,000 pages or so. But there's a lot of background that goes into these characters. Excuse me. Ivan has collected newspaper clippings of horrible things that people have done. He discusses horrible things that animals do, but he doesn't care about them. And he doesn't care about horrible things that have happened to adults either. He's interested in what happens to children. The adults have eaten of the apple, as he says, so damn them all. What do I care for them? In other words, they're not innocent. But Ivan, who's talking to his younger brother, Elisha, who's about to go into the priesthood, and he gives him a tale of all these terrible, terrible things. And he ends with one about this young 8-year-old boy, which is significant, because 7, 8-year-olds in Russian Orthodox, which is, Dostoevsky is a Russian Orthodox, is the age of reason. And below that, one is not morally culpable or guilty, because one doesn't have the understanding of right and wrong or free will to engage in such things. And that's why the child in this example is significant. In this story, there's this general who owns this great landmass and has a lot of dogs and property and so forth. And this child throws a rock and accidentally hits one of the general's dogs and damages its paw. And this sends the general into a rage. He has the boy stripped naked, sent up to a prison, so to speak, overnight, brought back out the next morning in the snow, completely naked, told to run in front of everyone, including his mother. And he sicks the dogs on him that have not been fed purposely for this, and they tear the boy to bits. And the question then is, Ivan asks Elisha, what should be done to that general? Should the general be shot? And Elisha says, yes. And then he says, but he should be shot, yes. But what I said was absurd. Why is it absurd to assume that the general should be shot in this case? Yeah.
It's too easy to die.
Is that what Elisha means by the absurdity of it? That perhaps. That's perhaps it, yes?
Well, they want to shoot him in the first place before killing him, boys. So by killing him, they're basically going against, they're being hypocrites because they're killing a murderer for killing, and that makes them murderers.
I don't think that's quite what Elisha might imply, although that's part of it. And we might tease out the concepts there and say, well, we have something called capital punishment. Some call that state-sanctioned murder. Others argue, no, it's relevantly different. It's capital punishment. It is a punishment. It is putting to death, but it's a just putting to death. It's not a murder. There's debates about that. But part of that is in the background, I think, of what Elisha's thinking.
Yeah, kind of what you were saying, it's just responding with evil.
It increases the amount of suffering. Does it reduce the suffering of the 8-year-old boy? Does it bring back the 8-year-old boy? Does it bring justice and meaning and purpose and harmony to the universe? Elisha is not at all sure about that. Yes.
Wasn't he also saying, like, at one of these points when you bring children into it, that it's not right for them to be the cause for this harmony? So he's like, I don't want to forgive, I don't want to be a part of this, if that's what it takes to reach harmony. Like, I'd rather
right.
just, like, not have forgiveness and not bother it, just, like, kind of stop at it where it is. Because
Yes.
the cost of harmony is too great when you bring children and all of that evil into it, so just
Yeah.
quit it before bringing it on. And
That's what
further bringing evil to the harmony, which
Or put another way, as he claims, this is thinking that is not of this world, which is an interesting phrase, not of this world, because that's not insignificant. There are, in fact, you might see bumper stickers, NOTW, not of this world. There's a view that Jesus is not of this world, that we ought not be so concerned about this worldly stuff. But what Ivan is saying is that I know about the suffering in this world. I'm not convinced that the future heavenly possible state of affairs could ever justify the horrible suffering of the child. And, he claims, as you put it, I'm not convinced that harmony is worth it if it requires the suffering of just one child. And of course, it's not just one child, right? It's untold billions of lives that have been harmed and suffer through the millennia. Yeah. Did you have a question? No. Okay. So he ends with this. Tell me, Elisha, would you, if you were tasked with creating the fabric of human destiny or something like that, knowing that in the end salvation and harmony and peace and rest at last is a possibility, but only contingent upon, only if it were necessary for this horrible, horrible suffering of this innocent child? And Elisha says, no, I would not. Even if it happened for just one horrible, suffering child. He says no. And in response to this, it's unclear what we should say. How in the world can we make sense of an all-good God when we look at all the horrible suffering. There are some responses, and there are 8 or so on page 192 of Rauhut. Did you have a question?
I just wanted to, like, this is bringing an idea that I learned about in a world religions class a couple semesters ago, where, like I don't remember what religion what it was, but some people say that the children's suffering or the suffering that's on the world is a purposeful work of God, that like he sent these children to suffer, that they're angels or something, so that humans can see the suffering and understand that it's bad and try to fix it, because humans are imperfect and like God is perfect. We have to know evil and good.
Okay, good. Well, there are variations of Christianity that have that view. So I'm not sure specifically which branch we might say. But as far as the theodicy, which is an attempt at justifying the goodness of God in the face of these horrible evils, that example is a combination of a couple. Number 1, the big plan theodicy, and perhaps number 7, the test theodicy, and perhaps the contrast theodicy. That is, we couldn't know what good is were there not evil. But again, that goes back to our earlier point. Do we have to have this amount of horrendous suffering just so that we can understand what is good? Could we not really know what is good if there were no evil? Because if that were the case, then heaven is actually not going to be that great. Why? Is there any evil in heaven? That would be weird, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
If there's no evil in heaven, then I have no contrast. It's all good. Can I imagine an all-good world? Of course you can. It's called heaven. But according to the hypothesis here, it wouldn't be that great because we wouldn't even know that it was good, because there wouldn't be any evil as a contrast. Go ahead.
Well, couldn't we have a contrast as, evil, not good, because of how bad this evil gets? So that say we go off to heaven, and there is still some form of evil, but it's not at the same level of what we've been experiencing down here.
Well, that's not the traditional view of heaven, that there is suffering in it. I don't know of any view of heaven that has suffering in it. But maybe there are some. I mean, there's a lot of interpretations the world over, but I've not heard of that. Say again?
Wouldn't having this much suffering here make it so that when we're up there, that's not considered suffering? It's just considered a way of life. That's why we have such gnarly evil data over here.
It's gnarly indeed. I don't know. Well, that's one way of saying it's not really evil.
Well, it would allow us to give us contrasts. Up in heaven, it may not be. It may just be part of life, so that we are given.
That's
this
right.
kind of evil here.
Good.
So we have contrast up there and going, oh, well, that's not actually suffering. Well, that's not evil.
Very good. That's going to take us to the last. I don't have time to get into all of these theodicies, although I want you to look at them and figure out which one makes the most sense. The strongest argument that's used historically is something called the free will theodicy, and connect that with the big plan theodicy and the limits of human knowledge theodicy. All of those three are ultimately interconnected, and we'll see how they are interconnected. And I'll try to answer your question in a moment with this contrast question. You had a question, Ken?
I was just gonna say, isn't kind of like the mind-body thing, what would be the point of trying to get to heaven if it wasn't you going to heaven? So the suffering here ties yourself into up there, so you understand what suffering is and you understand that it is good up there.
That the suffering is good.
Yeah, like the Dr. Nefarious thought experiment, like, oh, if it's not me, why should I care kind of thing.
Perhaps.
Oh, it is me, I wanna go to heaven, I care, so that's why this happens here, because you know up there it's you.
Okay, maybe.
Otherwise, why would you be religious if you're not the one going to heaven?
Certainly. That's unclear that explains why there's suffering. And go back to our discussion of free will and libertarianism. Remember I prefaced this with libertarianism? If I'm going to believe in heaven and hell, I had better be a libertarian of the strongest sort. Because if I am going to suffer eternal hell, and what do we mean by hell? If you look at Dante's Inferno, basically it means whatever your worst fear is, that happens to you. For how long? Forever. What's your worst fear? You don't have to say it, but think about it. Imagine that forever. What do you have to have done to justify that? And you better be 100% responsible for whatever it is that you did, or else that punishment seems a little disproportionate. And the same thing with heaven. Most people live about 70 to 90 years old. Is that enough time to really develop and become a good person to justify getting into eternal bliss forever? Maybe we just don't know. Maybe the limits of human knowledge, the basic idea is that we are simply too unintelligent to understand why God lets innocents suffer. God has his reasons, but we humans cannot understand them. That's variation on this too. Real quick questions, and then I'll continue with it.
Well, I guess, yeah, how do we scale how someone gets into heaven or hell? Because everyone has a different definition of evil,
Maybe, that's true. Yes, if I'm somebody who's never, ever had any problems, really, I've got everything I want, I've basically pampered my whole life, and then I stub my toe. The pain! Why, God? To me, that might be horrible. But if I'm John McCain, and I've suffered through torture and a POW camp for 5 years, and then I get brain cancer, and then I stub my toe, I'll be okay. There's a difference in response.
Yeah.
Right, I think that's a good point. However, Holocausts, regardless of your background, screw flies, sarin gas, Ebola, these things are horrible, it seems, in an absolute sense. And I think that might be one response on behalf of the argument from evil. Yeah.
So reading this, theists are trying to say that a world without evil and without human freedom is worse than a world with human freedom and suffering, but wouldn't that just be heaven?
It depends. Because here's the argument. And this goes all the way back to St. Augustine and our discussion of omnipotence. And again, here is another example of where not everyone agrees with what omnipotence means. Can God step in and stop suffering, evil, without infringing on our freedom, our free will? On one argument, on one side, it says no. It is logically impossible for God to step in and save us from suffering without removing our free will. And in that case, we become no longer human if our freedom is lost. We become like machines. We become like clockwork oranges, as Anthony Burgess referred to it in his movie Clockwork Orange, or lobotomized patients from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Yeah, I can't choose evil anymore, but I'm not choosing anything anymore. I'm no longer responsible. I'm no longer a human autonomous being. I am a machine. A clockwork orange. I look alive and beautiful and juicy, whatever, on the outside, but inside I'm wound up like a machine. That would be worse, according to this argument, than a world in which there was no suffering, but also no freedom. The argument there is, in order for there to be freedom, for us to be humans, there has to be the choice of good versus evil. And because of that choice, because of free will, evil happens. And God allows it. Why? Well, maybe we just can't fathom it. And in this case, something called the parent analogy. This is a variation still in the free will theodicy, but it's very clearly part of number one, the big plan theodicy, and the limits of human knowledge theodicy. Again, attempting to vindicate the goodness of God in the face of evil. How can we make sense of it? Well, maybe we're like children. I take my daughter Lola to get a shot at the doctor's office. She doesn't know who the doctor is. She doesn't understand needles being jabbed into her arms. She watches me, and I'm actually holding her. Not only am I not helping her and avoid pain, I'm actually helping the doctor do this. And she's crying. She doesn't understand. And I try to explain, so you don't get measles, mumps, or rubella. She doesn't know what any of that means. She doesn't understand that it's for her own good. Yes, I'm allowing suffering. But you all understand, and I understand, that it's for a greater good. I allow the suffering because if I didn't, worse, and maybe you were talking about this earlier, worse suffering would result. Do you understand? I let my kids, I test them sometimes when they're fighting. I don't step in every time. I don't want to be that kind of helicopter parent that stunts their growth because I step in and solve their problems for them at every turn. They need to learn. But this parent analogy, if it's taken too far, and it sounds great, it sounds like it makes sense. God is an omnipotent, omnibenevolent parent, the perfect parent. And just as my daughter, who's 3, doesn't understand why I allow her to suffer on occasion for a greater good that she can't fathom just yet, God allows humans to suffer. And we just can't fathom it because we're like children. To which I respond, what if my child, Lola, pictured here, is about to harm herself? And you can see what I did here. You see that, you can't tell, there's a piece of wood there that she's trying to dislodge. She shouldn't be doing that. She had, at this point, she's 2.5. She had no concern whatsoever about her physical safety. She just totally didn't care. And she would play over there. And the area between this bar and that and the wall was a little bit wider than these. She couldn't get through those, and I wasn't sure. She kept playing over there, and I thought, well, I better check that. So I just gently, manipulated her head to see if it would fit through, and it did not. Right? So I thought, oh, to my satisfaction, she'll be fine. And then,
Climbed over.
what's that?
And then she climbed over.
Well, I don't know. She didn't climb over. She somehow shimmied through, apparently. Because one day I was in the kitchen cooking, and I looked over, and she's standing right here on the ledge, and she's kind of looking down at the abyss, as it is to her. She's 2.5. I know, it's weird. It's just like, I've lived a good life. 2.5, I think, is good enough. Now's the time. To end it. And I'm just watching that for like 3-4 seconds, which is a long time to be sitting there while your daughter's about to fall. And then I leap over that little, what is that, security gate thing? Jumped over it into this chasm, into the stairwell, somewhat heroically. And I stopped her, put my hand up, and I just held her there. And then she got angry at me. She got pissed off because what was I doing?
You were interfering with her free will.
That's exactly right. Was I wrong to interfere with her free will? And did I really take away her freedom because I stopped her from falling? Wouldn't I be considered a negligent parent of the worst sort if I just sat there and said, Lola, you're going to have to learn sometime, and just left her there? That would be awful.
Yeah.
I would be horribly negligent. And just to show you how curious, look at her. What is she doing there? It's her foot, seeing if she can get through there. It's cute, but terrible. A good parent would stop this, as I did here with my makeshift wall. Why is it that God doesn't do that? I'm not saying I'm better than God, but kind of. Yes?
What if the first time when you tried to give her head food, you taught her how to go through?
Why the hell did you say that? Now it's in my head that I'm responsible. Well, that's conceivable, yes. Thank you for bringing that up. So, now the other thing is, let's end with this. The argument is this. Free will is great. If we don't have free will, we're not humans. The reasons God allows suffering is to allow us to be free. But the question is, if God were to intervene, would that get rid of all our freedom? If so, it makes sense that there's no godly intervention. But not everyone agrees with that, because there are a lot of people who do believe in miracles. And what is a miracle if not the intervention of God in some fashion? Violation of a law of nature, an intervening of God. If you think about Saul, you know about Saul on the road to Damascus? He was a Jewish person who persecuted Christians for a living, basically. And then he had this direct experience, religious experience with God, with Christ, with Jesus. And he converts. That's the road to Damascus. He converts and becomes St. Paul, basically the second founder of Christianity. That's a pretty big conversion. And how else do you explain that than that God intervenes directly to change his mind? Did he take away Saul's freedom? Could Saul have said to that experience of the divine intervention, nah, I'm not going to do what you're saying, God. I'm going to do what I'm still doing here, which is persecuting you because I'm persecuting your people. That would be weird, wouldn't it? It doesn't seem that you have that much free will if God is telling you to do something and you feel it is truly God. This gets us to a problem. Is it limiting Saul's freedom? If so, number one, so what? I'm a horribly negligent parent if I don't intervene and limit my child's freedom to some extent. I haven't removed her freedom completely. Why would it be the case if God intervened in certain cases? Why would we have to say that all of our freedom is completely gone? And if it doesn't limit our free will, then we ask, well, why doesn't God intervene much more often? And we might say, well, for all we know, that God does. For all we know. Perhaps God has intervened. Maybe the Holocaust would have been much, much worse. But that's a pretty tough claim to make. A tough claim to argue. Already talked about how much free will we must have to warrant, say, heaven or hell. And the final point we might ask with the free will defense is, or theodicy, can free will make sense of natural evils? Let's imagine, for the sake of argument, we're convinced by the free will theodicy. Have we satisfied our justification of God with respect to natural disasters? How is it that human free will can play a role in natural disasters? Could you answer that?
Butterfly effect? Possibly, no.
But that's a butterfly, not a human. No,
I mean,
kidding.
you might as well be a human. Effect.
Good. But what if we accept that humans have been around for only 200,000 years and the dinosaurs went extinct before humans even existed? How can free will make sense of the extinction of species that existed prior to humans? We would have to invoke the idea that humans have always been. We're not done yet. I sense people packing up. And to me, that is the problem of evil right there, by the way. Just it's relative, right? Quick question, yes?
Couldn't you say something like climate change?
You could.
Human caused natural?
You could say that. You could say, I used to live in San Diego, and these people would build these multi-million-dollar homes right on the cliffs so they can look out to the ocean. And then the cliffs would eventually erode and they'd fall in. Nobody would get hurt. And there'd be a little joy there, a little schadenfreude. Like, yeah, you shouldn't have built there, you jackass. And I feel good. But then I realized you could do the same kind of reasoning. You know, there's all sorts of fault lines in California. Why did you build your house there? You know there's a fault line, right? And on it goes. There's mudslides there. Why would you build there? There's wildfires there. Don't build there. There are hurricanes that strike there. You shouldn't build there. That's a low-lying area. That's prone to flood. Don't build there. Tornadoes are there. Diseases there. Too cold weather is there. Too hot weather is there. Point is, no amount of freedom can... Let's see. The point is that you cannot escape natural evils regardless of your choices. Eventually, they're going to get you. Disease or something like that. And so the free will theodicy is problematic on that score. Plus, the same response. Global warming is something relatively recent. However, there are cycles in which the world has cooled and warmed, and humans weren't around at that time, so it would be hard to justify that. One way of doing it, and we're out of time, is to invoke what's called the original sin, and that all humans are born into sin, and part of our human condition, including natural evils, is caused by original sin. And in fact, that relates to our discussion for next time when we get into moral theories. Don't pack up yet. I will talk about that to begin with, to tie and move into what's known as divine command theory. So the two, philosophy of religion and ethics combined, go right into one another fluidly. Also, please come to class on Monday with your iPhones and electronic devices, because you're going to be doing your evaluation of me. The first the first hour of class, there will be an observation, and then I'll have to leave, and you'll do your online observation. The more people present, the better. So please do show up. And after the class is over and I leave, please clap before I leave, as if it was always the case that that's what you do. All right, I'll see you all later on.